Welcome. This is Jean Eaton of Information Managers. It is my honor and pleasure to be with you today at Practice Management Nuggets. This is a weekly interview series with practice managers, healthcare providers, or trusted vendors who support healthcare practices. Our topics help primary care practice managers, healthcare providers, and owners to implement, maintain, or improve their business and practice administration so that healthcare providers can focus on providing quality healthcare services. I am your host, Jean Eaton, the Practice Management Mentor with Information Managers. This week, our guest is Grant Ainsley. Grant has spent over 3 decades in the media, public relations, and association management. He now works as a media consultant offering customized training for CEOs, politicians, association executives, and others. Grant is an award-winning journalist and public relations professional who has interviewed some of the biggest names in Canada. He is the author of The Honest Spin Doctor, a book that provides a roadmap to effective media relations for people who speak to the news media and the companies that they work for. Grant makes people and organizations think about the importance of communication and how they can immediately get better at a skill that they use every day. I'm delighted to have Grant join us today for Practice Management Nuggets to talk about Talk Like a Leader, how to make difficult conversations a win-win. What would be your number one tip, Grant, to help people deal with difficult conversations? What would be your number one tip on how to prepare for that?
Well, the key thing is preparation, Gene, and I guess the other key thing is to do it, is to have the difficult conversations. A lot of people shy away from them, hoping that things are going to change, things are going to get different. Somebody's attitude is going to be different. Somebody's work skills are going to change. Maybe the economy is going to change, and something won't be an issue anymore. But the reality is, if behavior continues over a period of time, chances are it's not going to change until something happens. And typically that is sitting down with the person and having a difficult conversation. So, the first thing is to understand that you do need to have that difficult conversation and have the conviction and the courage to do it. The second thing is to prepare for that conversation in the correct way, to make sure that you're fully prepared before you go into that conversation.
So it may be a difficult a difficult conversation, a difficult thing to do, but it doesn't get any better by putting it off.
No, it doesn't go away. And whether it is somebody's performance at work or maybe it's a personal situation, in most cases, the vast majority of cases, things are not going to change unless something is done to change them. And I also tell people that it becomes easier to have these difficult conversations once you understand how to do it, and once you've done it a time or two. Then the third and the fourth time is not near as difficult as it was the first time.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about communication and how we can make those difficult situations easier.
Well, I think the first thing people have to understand that we don't talk as much as we used to. It used to be a situation where we would talk to people a lot. That was our one of our only ways of communicating. And now with email and text messages and internet blogs and internet sites and all the rest of it, we communicate much more than we ever have done before, but we talk less. And certainly that's the case in work, where you think about working in an office with a number of people. You don't need to talk to people as much as you used to. Think about your clients. You can send them an email. You can send them a text message. You don't have to talk with them certainly as much as you used to have to. 30 or 40 years ago, if you want to talk to a client, you had to do it face to face or over the phone. And now, of course, with all the different ways that we have of communicating, we can do it by email, by text messages, a number of different ways. We can post things on social media, if they happen to follow us, whatever it might be. So the reality is we don't talk as much anymore. And I don't think this is going to change. If anybody has any teenagers with cell phones listening, they understand how little they talk compared to what they text. And, I say to my 19-year-old son, that's a phone, and you can really use that to call people. You can talk to people on that phone. And he says, no, it's fine. I'll just text them. And that's what's happening more and more. So I think we have a little bit of a problem having some of those conversations because we don't talk as much as we used to.
That's true. So we need to practice some communication skills. So can you walk us through that, Grant?
Sure, and I think people have to understand that if you're going to talk to like a leader, as the topic is called, you have to understand that there are obligations that you have as a leader to talk when you need to speak. But first of all, people have to understand the different parts of communication, and really there's about 5 different parts which include the message, which is obviously what you're saying. There has to be a sender, there has to be a receiver. There has to be feedback to that message. So in other words, are you getting the proper feedback from that person to understand that that they understand what you are saying? And it really is an obligation on the part of the person who's doing the speaking to understand that the other person is getting what they have to say. You've heard this so many times in work. Well, Joe, did you tell Jean that she had to do it? Well, I told her. Well, that doesn't necessarily it might get you off the hook, but it doesn't help with communication. And so there has to be a feedback where you understand that the other person has heard what you said and what you want them to do in case it's an order. And the 5th part of communication is noise. And many times there's other things going on around. There could be noise, there'd be actual noise that we think about as noise in what's in the air and different things making noise. The other thing could be that other things are going on at the time. There are certain people that have a really difficult time thinking or comprehending because other things go on. And so I think that's really important. You have to understand that there's much more than just talking. And that gets me to my next point, because I love this slide that you have up now, Jean. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's really true. And one of the things that people don't understand about communication is that it's just not all talking. People think, I'm communicating because I'm standing here with you and I'm talking. And in most situations, on a one-on-one basis or one person with a number of people, but especially with one-on-one situations, people really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so it's much more than just talking a lot. And so I advise people, if you want other people to listen to you, start listening to them. They will listen to you much more if you give them the respect of listening to them, as opposed to you simply talking. And so I think once you understand this concept of communication, that it is as much giving as it is sending information out there. And I think it's a big part of respect as well. My wife used to go to a number of formal events with me, and she said people rarely asked her about her. They talked about issues, they talked about me. They didn't talk to her about her. And so as a result, with many people she talked to, it was kind of going in one ear and really out the other, because she knew all these people were doing was talking about themselves. So it's really important to understand that people will listen to you and what you have to say if you listen to them. And the other thing that I think is important in this, Gene, is that he who asks the questions and does the best listening controls the conversation. It's not the one who's doing all the talking. But we don't necessarily thought it that way. We think if we do all the talking, we're controlling the discussion. The person who asks the questions is the one that leads the conversation and the one that controls the conversation, regardless of what the other person is saying. Along with that, I think it's also important to understand that you have to be a good listener, because it's difficult to ask good questions unless you're doing good listening.
So asking the good questions and being an active listener, so that you're actually engaged in that conversation, will help you make better questions.
Better questions, and it will allow the other person to think, well, this person really cares about me. This person's asking a lot of questions. And when it comes your time to speak, chances are they'll listen to you much more.
Okay. So when we're preparing for those difficult conversations, understanding how that communication process works and refreshing our memory because our skills are perhaps a little rusty about being good talkers, we're better at communicating in different ways. Being prepared, being an active listener and asking good questions. What else in that communication process do we need to pay attention to?
These are the things that I described earlier, the things that are on the screen. Is there has to be a message, obviously, what people are talking about. There has to be a sender, there has to be a receiver. That's the person who's speaking, the person who's listening. Feedback is what we talked about to make sure that people understand that they're comprehending what you're saying. And the other thing is I talked about the noise, which can be any distraction, which can really distract from what the message is and what the sender is saying. And so these are all parts of communication. There's 5 parts. People think communication is just one thing. It's the message, or it's the sender. Maybe it's 2 things. And it's not. It's much more than that. And if you're going to have effective communication, you need to consider all these 5 points.
Okay. So one of the other things that you talk about is body language, and that's such an important part to think of consciously that actually aids your conversation and helps you direct the conversation when you're having that difficult conversation.
Yeah, this is really true. Body language can be so very, very important, and I think that I think you have to look at a few things. Number one is, and then some people they have these difficult conversations seated at desks, but I always think that regardless of whether you're standing or seated, body posture is very important. And you can look much more in command of a situation by having good posture as opposed to leaning or as opposed to bending over a little bit. Stand tall, feel like there is a string that is pulling your head straight up to the sky. And so certainly posture is really important. If you can stand, you have much more presence than if you're seated. I always talk about people doing presentations to a board of directors or something like that. I always suggest make sure that you stand because you have better presence and you can be more confident in yourself if you are standing, as long as you get over the hump of doing that. The second thing is to use your hands. Hands give your voice rhythm and cadence. They allow you to express yourself. And somebody that just has their hands in front of them, clasped in front of them, or in their lap or whatever it might be, they're losing the opportunity of allowing their hands to help them express themselves. So I think that's really important. The other thing that's important about hands and the use of hands is that we are all the most conscious about the center of our bodies. Our stomach area, just above and below the belt. We're most conscious of that area, far more conscious of that area than we are about, say, our shoulders or our knees or whatever it might be. And so anytime that you can open up the middle of your body to somebody, it makes it really clear that you're being honest, you are to be trusted, and opening up your middle of your body can really help with that. And the final thing is eye contact, which is one of the really easy mistakes that people make, especially during difficult conversations. It's really difficult sometimes to have eye contact. And that's unfortunate because eye contact is very important. It's really difficult, I think, to have a really good conversation without looking at somebody or looking at somebody almost all the time. It's also very difficult to gauge reaction and to get feedback unless you're looking at the person. So try to have as much eye contact as possible with the person that you're talking to.
That's interesting that body language is both so important, and it's something you need to practice when you're preparing for that difficult conversation, but also being able to interpret the body language of the other person and trying to position your body language to encourage an honest conversation where you're still in a person of power, you're leading that conversation, but being able to be honest and receptive and to be able to read what that other person is projecting in their body language will help you to be able to have a more effective communication with that difficult conversation.
Sure. Little things like leaning forward to listen better to what somebody is saying is one example of where something you're doing can open that up. Make sure that if the person is seated, you're seated. The person's standing, you're standing. You want to make sure that you're on the same level with them for a number of reasons. And sometimes people get a little bit close during these conversations, so you have to be cognizant of that. There is a matter of personal space that you should not enter into. However, at the same time, show that you're open and receptive to what the other person is saying, and try to face the person, as opposed to sometimes people will be talking and they're really not facing the person. They're kind of at an angle, which can sometimes set up a bit of a barrier between the two of you.
Okay, so these are great steps and reminders to prepare for that difficult conversation, but we still need to have that conversation, don't we?
Yeah, and really what you have to do is understand that a big part of your success in that conversation is going to be the way that you prepare for it. And so I think it's really important. I say prepare well and execute better, because that really is what you're trying to do. You're trying to prepare well, and then when you have to deliver, it's showtime, and you definitely want to do really well. So a few things to keep in mind. Number one is get your facts straight. There's nothing worse than having that conversation and starting it off and you don't have your facts straight. And so when you are going through all your information before you have that conversation, you're doing your preparation, make sure your facts are straight. Start with a couple of statements that are really important, that you don't really think need to be said, but should be said. And so it could be something along the lines of let's say you have somebody in the healthcare field, and they have to continue to enter information, and they've been making a lot of mistakes. It doesn't hurt to start the conversation like, Gene, one of the most important things that our company prides itself on is accuracy to our clients. And we would have a really difficult time staying in business if we make a lot of mistakes, because clients no longer would hire us. And as a matter of fact, in our slogan, it is, we don't make mistakes, or whatever it might be. And so state some of these things up front that sort of gets the conversation going in the direction that you want. And then the next thing is to develop the number of things that you want to say during this conversation. So maybe somebody's accuracy percentage has increased from 2% to 10% in the last couple of months, and so you want to make a point about that. You also want to make a point of, is there anything in this person's life that is affecting them and making these mistakes when they enter this medical information? Is there anything that I can do to help you to reduce these? So go through a number of things there and write down these points. And I always suggest doing it by hand. So writing down what I call your key messages by hand, and making sure, because if you do it by hand, chances are you will remember it better. And the next thing you have to do then is anticipate what the person is going to say. And the person could throw out a bunch of different things that you expect. Some of them you don't expect. But what the person is going to say is going to help you determine how you're going to come back. Try to stay focused on the conversation, stay focused on the things that are important, and don't deal with the things that aren't important. You do want to stay on message, and you want to make sure that the conversation remains focused on the message and not on a bunch of red herring issues that may or may not affect things. Well, Doris, last month, she had a really bad month too, so it's not just me. You want to keep the focus on the person you're speaking to. Keep your cool during the discussion. Make sure that you do keep your cool, because that becomes really, really important if that doesn't happen. The other thing is, let me just get rid of this message here. The other thing that's really important is to try to build hope, because if you can build hope, it really helps you get off to a different way of doing things. So in other words, look, I know you can do this. You've been really good in terms of your accuracy before, and so let's work on this. But I know you can do it. The other thing you want to do at the end is set some goals and have some clear definition for the person of what they have to do and what you would consider an improvement. So it could be something along the lines of, look, we're going to meet again in a month from today. So it is going to be, name the date. And at that time, I want to see your accuracy increase by 5% or whatever that number is. Set a goal. And finally, and the most important thing is to document what was said right after the meeting. And so we met, this was the date, here's what I stated, point 1, 2, 3, here's what she countered with, here's what we decided as a result, we were going to meet again. And at that time, I want her to improve her accuracy by 5%. Somebody once said that one dull pencil can be sharper than some 6 bright minds. And so make sure that everything is documented. And it's not anything you know, sometimes you can share it with a person if that's what you want to do. In other cases, you just want to keep a record for yourself of that difficult conversation.
Okay. So there are a lot of good points in there. And one of the things that I really liked is being able to actually write out what your key messages are. Doing the handwriting, using that other part of your brain helps you to keep those key messages in place. And then you're working out what those key messages are before you have the conversation. And then you can come back and refresh your memory and keep on focus by having those key messages.
Yeah, they taught us this in school, Gene, to write things down, take good notes, because if we write them down, chances are we will remember it better. But once we get out of school, we don't have to do that. And so we highlight things, or we go, yeah, I want to talk about this. And okay, I'll remember to talk about that. And then you go into the conversation and you realize after it's all over that one of the critical points is something you forgot. And so not only should you write down the messages because you will remember them better, but also take some notes with you into the meeting, you know, some of your handwritten notes to make sure that some of the things that you talked about, it shows the other person that this is a big issue, you are prepared. And so it's important to write things down because it helps you remember them. And it also is a little bit of a record that you can take into the meeting to help you out.
Okay. Grant, each situation is unique and different, but how would you set up this meeting? You know that you're going to have a difficult conversation. How do you set up the meeting to have that conversation?
Give the person an opportunity to know that what's going to be discussed. I don't think it's really good to catch a person off guard. A lot of people will, I think it depends on the person to a large degree, because some people are pretty flexible. Other people, they really want to know what the topic is. And what you really have to avoid are the danger of getting into that difficult conversation before you want to. And so in other words, Gene, look, I'm wondering if we could meet to talk about your performance. Is tomorrow, sometime tomorrow, work for you? Yeah, great, Grant. Yeah, but what's wrong with my performance? Well, you know, you've been making a lot of mistakes, and you don't want to go there, right? As soon as you go there. So I think it's best to say, look, want to talk about your performance, and typically some of these things come during reviews that happen on a fairly regular basis. Sometimes not, however. But I think it's important that you do set time up so the person understands it. I also think it's important to set up that time as quickly as possible. So maybe in the morning you could say, hey, are you free this afternoon? Could you come by about 2 o'clock? I just want to talk about your performance and how you think things are going with work. And that way the person doesn't go home and stew over it and think about a whole bunch of things and stress. And so typically if you can do it the same day, but I also think it shows respect to the person if you could give them a little bit of time before that meeting, because they have to prepare to a certain degree themselves before they go into that meeting. And you know, pulling somebody off their desk and into your office isn't necessarily the best way to do it.
Right. So there are some circumstances where we know that this is of importance and something that we can anticipate, like our performance evaluations. Sometimes we observe something that is not appropriate. Maybe it's a behavior pattern when they were discussing something with a client or with another vendor or a business partner, or perhaps there's some type of conflict between the employees in the office. That immediacy is important, but you still want to be able to use your sandwich approach about having setting the tone, what are the key messages, being clear, anticipate the responses, and setting um, the hope, how you say building hope. I think that's really important. And then there's clear instructions. So in the type of a scenario where you've observed somebody doing something inappropriate or not as good as you expect it to be, any particular tips about how we can do this a little less a little less prepared?
Well, I do think you should go into every conversation prepared. And so if you see something going on, like you mentioned, Gene, I would still take 10 minutes to, clear your head, think this is what I want to say, write down a few things, and then call the person and deal with them. And that has to be something done with, not necessarily setting up a time. Hey, Gene, could you come in for a moment? Just want to chat with you about something. And this could be as soon as 15 minutes after you've seen the person deal with a vendor or a client or whatever it might be. Another thing that I should have mentioned, if you do have time to prepare before a difficult conversation, I suggest taking out your cell phone and setting it up and seeing what you look like, going through some of those key points that you're going to make with that person. And of course, this obviously takes, privacy of being in an office or at home or something, but seeing what it looks like and seeing what you sound like and check out your body language and then determine if there's some things that you could change to help when you do make that presentation. Sometimes you look back at, a video on a phone and you go, wow, I kind of look really overbearing, or I look really, I don't look very confident. And so sometimes you can change things a lot. By the way, some people recommend that maybe you should do this in front of a mirror and sort of do your pitch in front of the mirror. And quite frankly, that's the worst thing that you can do, because you're so conscious of what you look like and what your hair looks like and all these things that you forget about the actual message that you're trying to deliver. So I think with today's technology, use it. If you do have an opportunity to plan for a difficult conversation, quickly shoot some video of you, look back at it, and then see what you look like.
I think that's a good point about um, we still need to take some time to prepare, and maybe only 10 or 15 minutes is appropriate in the circumstance. But if you go through the process of preparing and practicing for having those difficult conversations, at some point they do become easier and you probably require less prep time.
Yeah, it's like anything else. You get better by doing, and so yes. And the other thing that it does is that it builds some time where if you see something happen that you're upset about, that's the last time that you want to have a difficult conversation, is when you're really upset about something. It becomes much tougher to control your emotions. You become much more confrontational. And remember, as a manager, it's something that you want to do that is part of your job, and you have to manage people. And so many times the worst time to do it is immediately after you see something going wrong. You do want to deal with it in a very timely fashion, but there are all kinds of reasons why you should take 10, 15, 20 minutes before you have that difficult conversation.
Okay. So in the effort of being able to prepare and practice, if you've created a culture in your organization that having good conversations and knowing how to talk and communicate is important, you can build in that practice time as part of your regular training, the things that you do in your office.
Sure, it's one thing to really, be a person who is an effective communicator, and you do a number of things to make sure that what you're saying is being heard, is being acted on, and you're doing a whole bunch of things to become a better listener, and you're doing everything yourself to become a better communicator. It doesn't mean that everybody else in your office is getting better as well, although sometimes some of these things do rub off. But I think it's really important for managers today, managing a number of people, to say we have to do a better job when it comes to communication. And you start to look around, and communication pain can become very expensive. I saw a study one time that said that An average of 17 hours a week was wasted because of communication failures. And so in other words, the boss says to an employee, I want you to do this. The employee goes away and does a whole bunch of work and comes back, presents it to the boss. And the boss says, this isn't what I wanted. I wanted this. And so, you add up the number of hours because of poor communication. And the study showed for an average company of 100 people, the cost on an annual basis was over $500,000, $525,000 because of poor communication. And so organizations have to take a look at this and say, yes, there is a role for our managers to speak better, but there's also a role to have better communication with everybody in the organization. And so I think companies today really have to focus on that. How can we become better as an organization with communication? And the first thing I think that you want to do is build transparency. And so you may want to build transparency in who knows, all of your operating procedures so everybody understands what everybody else has to do. A lot of companies these days, they build total transparency with salaries and a whole bunch of different things. So everybody, everything's on the table. Everybody understands there's no hidden agenda here anywhere. So certainly anything you can do to have more transparency within your organization is very helpful. Number two, try to get people to talk more and not just to write, and look at examples where people are, sending emails to the office. Is there another way of doing that? Can we have that discussion at a team meeting or whatever it might be? And maybe, once a week you schedule meetings so people can really have to sit down and talk to one another, or try to, in some cases, force people to speak rather than, sending emails or not talking. Eliminate us versus them. A lot of organizations, there are a number of silos that take place, and people work in different departments, and so it very much becomes an us versus them. I see this happen in government a lot, where where one portion of one government department does not know what the other one is doing. Just not in government, it's private business as well, but I think I've seen it worse in government than private business, but it still happens all over the place. And as you try to get more of a communications culture, there's no bad ideas. I think it's just totally wrong to be trying to have people to come up with ideas to foster better communication, and then as a manager you're slapping a number of those ideas down and saying, hey, that's a crazy idea. Where'd you come up with that? If you're going to encourage open discussion and open communication, there can't be any bad ideas.
There is a lot to learn about communicating. How can we do this better, Grant? Everything is scalable. It may be a big issue for me if my coworkers leave our shared kitchen area messy, and that would be a difficult conversation for me. There are lots of opportunities that we can learn as a group and as individuals to be better and more confident about communicating. What are tips that we can do to be better prepared? How can we learn this better?
Well, I think what you want to do is you want to, first of all, check your message. So what am I saying? What are we trying to say about the noisy, the messy kitchen? Is the message is about other people leaving a mess behind and what it does to you? So what's the message? And I think it's really important to then understand, okay, how am I going to get this message across in the best way? And the best way typically to do it is through communication. And there are some times that people send emails and they send texts, and it just everything goes wrong right away. That there's email's great, but you really don't understand what people are thinking. And sometimes if you're sending an email out about a messy kitchen, and really what you're trying to say is, hey, look, guys, I'm the one that ends up cleaning the kitchen here. And so all I'm looking for is, leave it like you found it, or maybe even better than you found it. And, I'll take care of the stuff that, because it's my job, but could everybody just pitch in and do a little bit more? I'd sure appreciate it. And that's really the message you're trying to get across. You put that message into email, and the next thing you know, you've got a nasty, chain of emails going back through a number of people in the organization, and everything goes off the rails. So it's really important to understand that that you do need to deal with these things right away, and you do need to deal with them the way that they should be dealt with.
So improving our communication skills will help all of us individually in the organization and the organization as a whole get better. You've got some resources to help us. You've got a handout for us today, and we can subscribe to your newsletter, which has lots of great tips.
Yeah, I do my newsletter once every 2 weeks. It comes out every other Wednesday, and there is a portion at the bottom of my website, grantainsley.com, where people can sign up for the newsletter to receive it. And you also have a handout there, Gene, that we put together for this webinar. And so I know that people can get that from you, or I'm not quite sure how they actually go about it. We didn't communicate that one, but I'm sure, Gene, people can get a hold of that in some way.
Absolutely. They can download it off of the webinar site and to be able to follow up with us. Grant, people can reach you off of your website, and if they're interested in knowing more about communication, you have courses and workshops available and booking you as a speaker.
Yeah, so what I've done for a number of years is do media training for organizations, and I'm still doing that. But somebody at one time said to me, I may never speak to the media because of the number of people here around the table who are taking the training today who are ahead of me on the list. But this woman said, I can use these same tips to talk to customers and clients every day. The messages are the same. And so what I've done is I've taken the model that I use for the media training sessions and now have put them into both a keynote format and a workshop format for Talk Like a Leader. And so there's a presentation, and then we go over a number of difficult conversations that people need to have. And then they do the difficult conversations on video, and I critique those conversations. And so we look at things like, did they do a good job staying on message? Did they, what was their eye contact like, and so on and so forth. Provide some critique and then have them do them again. And so, a number of people within an organization can become much better at communication with one single session.
Okay. Grant, you have given us lots of information to be able to help us deal with those difficult conversations. The conversations may be difficult, and the first one will be hard. The next one will be a little bit easier. And as we get to practice them and we become more efficient with them, then we can use them on a day-by-day basis to help us with each of those situations that we need to address a problem, to be able to establish our key messages, to anticipate those responses, build hope, and close the conversation with having clear goals and instructions for improvement and for follow-up, and to be able to document it.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Grant, is there anything else that you'd like to leave us with today?
No, other than my website, grantainsley.com, and certainly if anybody needs to reach me, there's contact information through the website as well.
Grant, thank you for helping us break down these steps so that we can continue to improve our skills and to be able to apply those good communication practices in all of our conversations, both at work and in our personal lives, and to be able to get better at talking.
Something we do every day. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Grant. This is Jean Eaton with Information Managers, your practice management mentor. I'm delighted that you've been able to join us today, and I encourage you to join us again for our next Practice Management Nugget interview. You can sign up and have advance notices of our guests, and you can join us on our website just about every Thursday for the next new Practice Management Nugget interview. This is Jean Eaton, thanking you and asking you to stay tuned.